Check it out. Today we are talking about the successful sale of this home, 1433 Crestridge Drive. We are in Maryville. So we're going to talk the details of the sale, how we marketed it, some of the negotiations that happened, and how we got it successfully closed. Let's get started. All right, I'm Haley Jones. I am your local Knoxville and East Tennessee real estate agent. I help people buy and sell land and homes in the Knoxville and East Tennessee area. Today, we are talking about the sale of a home in Maryville, 1433 Crestridge, as you heard in the intro. So let's talk about how this actually came about. The seller of the property found me on YouTube. She had been watching me on YouTube, and she called and she said, "Hey, we think we want to sell our house. I want to meet you first before I introduce you to my husband, etc." So we set an appointment. I went out. I took the book of comps for her, specifically for her home. The comps included what automated values were, so what Zillow says, what homes.com says, what realtor.com says, what Trulia says, what Chase says, what RPR says, all the places. What do they say? Then I also brought what the neighborhood comps are for that homes that are most close to her home. And this includes sold price per square foot, pending price per square foot, anything that was canceled or expired, so we could see if there was a threshold of something being too high. That was obvious. And then also what were current actives. So obviously the solds tell us where are things selling. That is a real number versus actives are kind of like a hypothetical, because we don't know if the actives are going to close for what they're under contract for. And of course, if the home is pending, we also don't know what that home is under contract for. So the number one thing is, what did houses sell for in the last 90 days? This property, we had enough 90-day sales that's all I pulled. Sometimes I need to go back 120 days. I don't really like pulling that much further back just because things change so quickly. Anyways, so I brought that for her. We looked at the tax record. We looked at if the square footage was correct. The information on the tax record, did any of it need to be done? Or do we need to fix any of that? Fix in the sense of, like, sometimes the most common thing you'll see on a tax record is like the wrong acreage and or the wrong square footage. So is there a document that do we need to have the house ordered, essentially? Like, what needs to be done? And also, when I met with her, I talked about my marketing process. Every home, what does every home get in terms of marketing, which I'll get to in a second. So we chatted. I heard her goals. And then so the next step was for me to sit down and meet with both her and her husband. So then I went back. I pulled new numbers, the most updated version of numbers. And then we talked about kind of their goals. What were they trying to do? What are they looking for? What would be an ideal outcome? And then also, like, why do we need to sell? What does that look like? Those kind of things. So there were a couple key things about this house that made it special. And we discussed those things. Like, they had made a ton of updates since they bought it. So new flooring, fresh paint throughout. They put a brand new kitchen in with quartz countertops, brand new appliances. They put a brand new primary bathroom, like complete remodel, floor to ceiling walk-in shower, new pergola, new front door. I mean, updated landscaping. They had done a ton of work on the house, which was a major plus. So we discussed all the things that they had done, and then we discussed pricing and timeline. So when we put a house on the market, we look at what is active, what's your competition. In other words, what else in the neighborhood is going to be perceived as your competition? Where is it priced? If there's 5 homes that are all priced in the same price point, if there's 5 homes for sale, all priced at $530, and then you're going to bring your house on the market and also price it there, and those homes have been sitting, probably not the best strategy. So we talked about where they wanted to be, what their goal was, what their timeline was, and made a plan accordingly. At that time, we also, because we knew their timeline had moved up, originally they had a little bit more time, but now the seller was about to start a new job already in another state. So they wanted to get this quickly sold, and they had already found another property to purchase. So we had a quick turnaround, which meant we needed to be super strategic on the marketing, on the pricing, all of those things. So the other thing that when it came to marketing and the marketing in general, so every home that I list for sale gets 2 horizontal long form videos, and these are specifically for YouTube. Now I cut them up and repurpose them for other platforms, but on the MLS we have an option when I list a home to put I call it a video preview or a video tour, but this is just like a highlight reel of the home. I'm not in it. I'm not allowed to be in it. My name can't be on it. It is literally a highlight of the home. So that's video 1. Video number 2 is a video where I am talking about the property. Hey, what's up? It's me, Haley Jones. I am so excited to share 1433 Crestridge with you today. We are blah, 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 whatever I say, right? So in that video is when I talk about all the updates that have been done, and I show all the updates that have been done so people can see those things. We also talk about how great the yard is. Where is it located? Why does that matter? What's so great about it? That is a more professional highlight reel where I am talking, and that goes on YouTube as an organic video. We also, as a part of our marketing, video marketing, shoot at least 3 vertical style shorts, like what you see on Instagram and TikTok and all the places, YouTube shorts. And those highlight the house. They show key features. Usually I do one of me being like, this is something awesome. So those also get repurposed as we need. Those are also where we put ad spend behind. So all of those are digital kind of video marketing. And then of course we have professional photo and professional video. I just mentioned professional video. We have professional photo. And typically when we are allowed, that includes aerial. So that's an overhead shot. So you can see the yard, you can see what's around. But of course, professional video. Your very first showing of any home is online. It is not when someone walks through the door. It is online. And what pulls people to the home to come see it is if your marketing online is great. In other words, if your first view of the house are photos with dogs in them and like people on the front porch, like probably it's not very inviting. Okay, you want to make it look good, like, hey, come see this. Anyways, we scheduled when we would have our photo shoot and all that. When we would do all those things, so they would be ready. And in this actually particular case, the front door was kind of a last minute change. And so we were waiting on the front door to get there. So as soon as the front door was in, we went in, we took the photos, we took the videos. Now, how long does that take? It depends, because if a house is, 800 square feet versus 5,000 square feet, there's a lot more to shoot in that 5,000 square foot home than a 800 square foot homes. But you could budget maybe 2 hours ish. And then most of the time sellers leave. Like these sellers for this home, they left. They had a dog, and actually the dog was there for this. The dog was like in a crate covered up. Super quiet. But anyways, it just depends on what you need. If you need to be there, we'll work around it. If you're not going to be there, that's great too. So all is well. And then sometimes people ask like, well, do you go through and stage the house or whatever? So it really just depends on what the house needs. This house really didn't need staging per se. Only thing sometimes I'll do is remove stuff off countertops, but we talk about that beforehand of what needs to be done before we shoot the listing photos. So for example, I tell everyone, take everything off your countertops, take stuff off the countertops. For one, because people that look through these pictures, you don't want them zooming in. What kind of shampoo do they have? Nobody needs that. We need them to look at the actual house, not the products you have. So anyways, we talked about what needed to be done ahead of photos. Like I said, we had a little timeline issue with but we basically scheduled around when that new front door was going to be in, which was actually a really cool front door where you push it and it glass goes opaque and you can't see through it. It's really cool. But anyways, that's a side note. So that's kind of the process of from when I meet you to when we get pictures made. Now, once we have pictures made, we can theoretically be on market within 48 hours, even 24, depending on the situation. I like to have usually a week, just so that way we can get, for example, brochures printed. This is a different house, but just as an example, so we can get brochures printed, have those for showings, etc. But we can work around whatever timeline. In this case, we had a little bit of time. We shot about a week ahead of when we were going to be listing. So we had time to get everything ready, all the assets that were needed. And then when it came to also marketing, this house had a lot of opportunities. And so that's something we talked about when we met. What are things that make this house really stand out? Now, some of them are obvious, like the location of this home. So good. The location of this home was so good for several reasons. For one, it was very close to all the Maryville things. There were there's 2 exits and entrances out of the neighborhood that make it super convenient, but also it is within Maryville city limits, which means it's zoned for Maryville city schools, which are highly desired. So it had this location kind of benefit to it. For sure. Something else, as I mentioned, was all the updates that the sellers made. The sellers made those updates with thinking what do they want to live in mind, but also knowing that they're probably going to sell this eventually. So that was the other piece of what made this home that was in a tougher market, this market in 2025 has been a little bit slower. We've seen stuff sitting, but they had a very tight timeline. So we really needed to make sure to emphasize all of the things that had been done. So of course, those were shown in the photos, but also we included an updates list within our brochures and then also on the MLS for agents to click and see the uploads of the updates on a document that was included. We also included some of that within our listing description of like, here's some things that you should know about this home, updates that are key, that are highly valuable, and also indicate this is not a fixer-upper, this is a move-in ready. So that was another major kind of asset this house had going to it. Another asset that we used to our advantage in our marketing and that we knew was gonna work well for us was that this is a single level home. That's pretty much zero entry. There is one step down from the sunroom to the back deck and then to the back deck to the backyard. I think like 2 steps. So when you go in the front door, there is no step. When you come from the front driveway to the sidewalk to the front door, there's no step. From the garage into the house, there's no step. So, I mean, single level in this location that's updated is really great, really a positive. So that was something that, again, we just highlighted, like the livability of this house is awesome. And then also this house backs up to a farm. So the backyard was nice and level, but also pretty private. It wasn't just like the rest of the houses in the neighborhood that backed up to other homes. It was completely private. So that was another plus that we mentioned and we talked about within our marketing, but also something that made the house appealing and something we considered when we're comparing like all of these assets this house has, we think about as we compare listing price for this home to homes that have sold in the last 90 days. That helps us to kind of inform. Now, this home had one major challenge, and that was that the HVAC system was leased. The sellers had recently replaced the HVAC system with a leasing situation. So the HVAC was not outright owned by the owner of the home. And so at the time of listing this house, there were some options for what to do about that. One was that the lease could be transferred over to the new owner. And one was that essentially the lease could be terminated, but only if somebody bought out the lease, if that makes sense. So this proved to be a major hurdle, which I'm going to talk about in a second. So that was really the main challenge. So we meet, we talk strategy, we talk pricing, etc. We get it on the market. From this point on, now is when I start blasting videos. I start, it's now ready to show. The sellers actually, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, went out of town for that first weekend, and we had pretty decent amount of showings. We had good feedback. The primary feedback that we got in the midst of all this, that first showing weekend, by the way, we have our brochures, we have our print brochures for showings, we have ads going, we have the YouTube videos up, like we have it getting to as many eyes as possible. And then also pricing wise, the seller had a specific goal with his price, his list price, and it actually made sense for what was around. So we priced accordingly. So some strategic pricing there, but also keeping in mind like timeline, what makes sense for this house, etc. So we get the house on the market and we have pretty decent showings that first weekend. Lots of interest, lots of calls, pushback. The pushback that we got was about the HVAC lease. And every person that came to see the house loved the house. Some people would not put an offer in because the HVAC was leased. And this just goes to show you, like, you always put the offer in with the terms that you want to start the conversation. The seller can always say no. The seller can always counter. But if you don't put your foot in the door, there's no chance you're ever going to get the house, right? Long story short, we had a buyer put in a really strong offer. The only sticking point of this offer was about the HVAC. And they wanted the sellers to pay off the lease. Like they wanted the lease terminated. They wanted to own the HVAC system outright. The sellers had purchased this HVAC system and lease system. They had done that because they wanted the maintenance plan with it. They wanted to be worry-free. If something happened with the HVAC, they didn't want to have to deal with it because they've had issues with HVACs in the past and they were like, we're not dealing with that. So to them, it was a major asset. To buyers, they wanted to own the HVAC system outright and they didn't want that maintenance plan. So it's just a difference of opinion, right? Buyers, they put in an offer. The major sticking point is about this HVAC system. And so the rest of the offer was very strong terms in terms of like the closing date matched what we needed, the stuff that stays and goes, what we needed, the inspection period was reasonable, like all of those things ended up being really great. The major sticking point was that HVAC. So we ended up negotiating that the sellers would pay off the HVAC system with the proceeds from the sale. So it's not like they were paying just out of pocket, but it was from the proceeds of the sale of the property. And that was the major, like, kind of, this sucks. But given the fact that all the feedback that we got from every buyer that came through was something about this HVAC system, it became clear that this was probably going to have to be what was going to have to happen, or the house was going to sit. Now, remember, we had kind of a timeline constraint in the sense of, like, one of the sellers was already gone, already moved out, had already started the new job, and then the other was going to be meeting across state or in a new state. So time was of the essence for sure. And so it just became evident that the best option was going to be to pay off the HVAC and call it a day. So anyways, with that contract, something that ended up being really great is the buyer essentially took the house as is, didn't ask for any other repairs, anything, besides that HVAC situation. And so that was great because it wasn't as if then we were also negotiating other repairs. So that ended up actually really working out. So in terms of the overall goals for the sellers in selling this house, the first goal was to close as quickly as possible. We closed, I believe, within 30 days and as seamlessly as possible. So the financing was there, which we checked before. There was actually a 1031 exchange involved, but that 1031 exchange situation was a property that the buyer had already closed. It's not as if the buyer was about to list something and was then going to use that 1031 exchange money. The buyer had a tight deadline as well. So we knew that in terms of thinking, okay, well, they're going to have to close because if you're buying with a 1031 exchange, you have a quick timeline. That's something that was achieved on both the sell and buy side. Another goal was, like I said, to sell with as little difficulty as possible. And so, as I said, the buyer purchased as is. The major sticking point was that HVAC situation, which we were able to get around. We didn't have issues with an appraisal. All of that was seamless. The goal sell price, we were short by $1,000. We listed at $530. That was the seller's goal, to have $530, and we closed at $529. And actually, I think that now that I'm thinking about this, I think that the seller may have done $1,000 towards a 2-year home warranty instead of inspections. So we were very close, very close to that 530 goal. Just a little short, $1,000 short. And then finally, people ask us all the time, do I have to be in town to close? So in this situation, this was actually one of the more complicated of closings because the sellers, as I said, one had already moved out of town, working a full-time job, and was living in a hotel until they closed in the new house. One was in town, but was also going to be starting the move a few days before close. So we were able to schedule with the title company, of course, with their help, a remote closing where we actually sent closing docs to a hotel. They got overnighted back. The other seller signed the next day in person in Maryville, and then she was able to move and get out of the house in time for the closing with the buyers. So of course, the buyers had their final walkthrough. All was well, and papers were signed, sealed, delivered, and we closed on 1433 Crestridge. So that is just one example of how a sale process goes. At the end of the day, both parties ended up with their goal. The house was sold for a price that the sellers felt good about, and the buyers ended up with a house that they love in a location that's great. So it worked out, and that's just how we got 1433 Crestridge sold. So if you have questions, of course, give me a call. If you want to know what would the process for your home look like, does it need to be staged? Does it need this? A lot of times people ask me, does it need to be staged? Well, for example, this house was so beautifully done, they didn't need staging. They had made a lot of updates, everything was going to present well. Sometimes we do need bring in staging. Sometimes, in this case, I mentioned the sellers had completely painted the whole house. Well, they chose colors that were neutral and not going to stand out. What you want to avoid on your listing photos is when, you have some bright, bold color that's going to turn off people from wanting to purchase your home. So they didn't have any of that. So we didn't need to overcome any of those kind of issues with painting or staging or any of that. And they just were very strategic in terms of the updates that they made, and knowing just these little changes. Even when I met with her, we talked about some of the landscaping. We talked about the front porch. What did that need to look like? So they were very intentional about the choices they made. And these were choices they made before I even knew them in terms of how they were going to update the home. Would it make sense? How would this be for resale? Because they were super smart and strategic, they got a really nice outcome. So anyways, congrats to everyone involved. That is 1433 Crestridge. I'm Haley Jones. I will see you on the next video. Always like and subscribe so I can keep sharing such great stuff with you. And I'll see you on the next video.